The City That Never Sleeps, a title that symbolizes the non-stop lavish parties of Las Vegas. But perhaps few people know that behind those neon lights, thousands of people are forced to park their RVs in the dark because they don't know where to sleep. By 2025, Las Vegas will be more than just an entertainment capital. It's becoming a symbol of a new crisis, where the roads around Boulder Highway, Lake Mead Boulevard, or the eastern edge of the Strip are covered with old RVs, many of which can no longer start. And the saddest part, most of the people living there once had stable lives and never thought they would cross the line into homelessness. However, unaffordable rent, precarious employment, and rising living costs have forced thousands of people to pour all their remaining assets into an old RV. They parked in the shadows to avoid attention, tried to avoid collisions with the police, and hoped to make it through another night without losing their last roof over their heads. In today's video, we'll explore how a city once the wealthiest in the United States fell into such a severe housing crisis that people are forced to live in their cars. The story of the four-wheeled roof in the entertainment capital might give you a completely different perspective on the American dream. Perhaps there is no social graph that rises as straight and steadily as the Las Vegas homelessness curve. While the city's tourism industry continues to show alarming red figures, another chart continues to rise quarter by quarter. That's a chart of people who have nowhere left to go. According to the latest statistics from Clark County, 7,906 homeless individuals were recorded in a single night, an increase of nearly 20% compared to 2023. And more significantly, this figure is just the continuation of a curve that began to rise in 2021, when the entire city had just over 5,000 homeless people. This is not a temporary shock. This is a persistent, systemic trend that is spiraling out of control. More concerningly, over half of them are unsheltered, meaning they are not in shelters, not in temporary housing, but are living in cars, trailers, RVs, hastily erected tents, or even in the city's underground flood tunnel system. This proves that the traditional shelter market, already strained, is now even more overloaded, no longer able to cushion the thousands of lives slipping away from the dream of home ownership. Unlike Los Angeles or New York, where tents cover the sidewalks, homelessness in Vegas is often hidden. The faded silver RVs parked silently, the old trailers lining the road. It's easy for outsiders to mistake this for just a nomadic community that values freedom. But when you look closer through that dusty glass door, you see they're not wandering at all. They're trying to hold on. For many, the RV is not a symbol of freedom, but the last line of defense before falling into complete street homelessness. RV camping is becoming increasingly common in residential areas, vacant lots on the outskirts, and even commercial districts. It didn't arise from a choice to live minimally or a love of wandering, but from the bitter truth that the cost of living and rent have far exceeded what workers can afford. Although the average home price in Vegas is only around $460,000, lower than in expensive coastal cities, this figure still seems out of reach given the vulnerable job market, unstable income, and volatile tourism industry. Even those who still have a roof over their heads are tightening every small expense, facing rising interest rate pressure, escalating prices, and the risk of being laid off at any time. Amidst that instability, stability seemed like a luxury, and for many households, just 2 paychecks were enough to draw the line between having a home and being homeless. Looking at the bigger picture, RV homelessness is the clearest indicator that Vegas's traditional housing model is collapsing at the lowest levels. There's a shortage of housing, homes are too expensive, incomes can't keep up, and policies aren't fast enough to support a housing market that's expanding out of control. It's even more difficult when many residential areas with HOAs completely prohibit overnight RV parking. This forces RV dwellers to constantly move, hiding in vacant lots, side streets, and industrial areas, places where they are unnoticed but also not safe. Homeless in Vegas isn't just about not having a roof over your head, it's also about having nowhere to stop. In a context where the supply of affordable housing is almost non-existent and rental costs continue to far outstrip income, RVs are no longer an option, but have become a pressure release. And without major changes in urban policy and the housing market structure, Las Vegas could become not just a Nevada desert hotspot, but the earliest warning sign of a housing crisis spreading across the United States. Perhaps nowhere else in America forces people to grapple with the housing problem in such a deadlocked way as Las Vegas. No matter how many extra hours they work, no matter how much they cut back on their needs, the result for low-income workers still seems to be an unsolvable equation. The latest reports indicate that the Las Vegas Valley currently lacks approximately 78,000 suitable housing units for low-income groups, a figure that exposes a massive gap in the housing market, where even full-time workers are no longer eligible to survive within the formal rental system. In that context of scarcity, landlords are once again applying the familiar standard: income must be 3 times the rent. A requirement that sounds reasonable on paper is completely impractical in a city where the majority of workers rely on the hospitality, casino, and restaurant industries that pay barely enough to get by. This leaves thousands of workers, even those who go to work regularly every day, excluded from the housing market from the very first round of consideration. They didn't fail. It's just that the numbers on the payroll couldn't keep up with the pace of the real estate market's growth. When the door to renting closes, another option is forced open: an RV, trailer, camper, or even just an old sedan. No credit score required, no long-term contracts demanded, no proof of income necessary. They become the last resort for those who have been evicted from legal housing. But that's never a cheap solution. The costs of repairing machinery, replacing tires, refueling, paying parking fees, covering insurance, and running the generator for air conditioning in hot weather. All these hidden expenses form a chain that most people entering the RV lifestyle don't anticipate. Just one small glitch, a flat tire, a broken part, a single ticket, and a whole month's work is immediately ruined. Market forecasts indicate that the situation will become even more strained in 2025-2026. House prices are expected to continue rising, supply will still not keep pace with demand, and a rent increase of just $100 per month could push many families out of the system they have relied on. Vegas math, the way salaries and living expenses never match up, thus becomes a brutal filtering mechanism. Those who cannot maintain an income that significantly exceeds rising costs will be gradually pushed to the margins, where RVs sit silently, where the path to homelessness begins with no other options. And this isn't just the story of a single individual. It is the consequence of a skewed economic structure. Wages are kept in the low zone, housing is pushed into the high zone, and credit policies tighten every door that the poor can enter. When the last choice for people is an RV, a temporary tent, or living in a cramped car, that's when the housing market has lost its most basic function, providing minimal stability for workers. Looking at Vegas math, we see not only unbalanced calculations, but also a major trend spreading across the United States. RV homelessness in Las Vegas is not an exception. It is the ultimate product of an imbalanced housing market, and a warning that this crisis is not unique to Las Vegas. It could be the future of many other cities. In an effort to keep Las Vegas clean in the eyes of tourists, in 2024, the city and Clark County expanded a series of regulations prohibiting sleeping, parking, tenting, and camping in public places. What's noteworthy is that these regulations don't exclude anyone, including those living in RVs who already consider their vehicle their final home. However, in reality, those regulations are enforced even when the shelter system doesn't have enough empty beds. This creates a familiar cycle: being warned, being threatened with a fine, being forced to relocate, and then being relocated again. Those living in RVs have to race against tickets, towing, and the increasing number of no overnight parking signs. They had no choice but to keep moving to avoid having their vehicles repossessed, the only thing they had left to hold on to. Because once the RV is towed away, everything is almost immediately over. The cost of towing an RV often exceeds a month's income, while daily storage fees make the situation even more unsustainable. Losing an RV means losing a home, losing belongings, losing shelter, and even losing basic safety. They fall straight into street homelessness, with no means to get back on their feet. Although the number of shelter beds increased by 3,004 in 2024, this figure is clearly insufficient to absorb the influx of people being pushed off parking lots and sidewalks. Furthermore, many shelters operate under strict rules. No pets, not suitable for night shift workers, limited length of stay, or not suitable for those needing long-term space. Some people would even rather live in a furnace hot RV in the middle of summer than endure a lack of privacy or be separated from their pets, the only thing that brings them a little bit of spirit. In that context, the city continues to regularly conduct sweeps, cleaning up RV areas or encampments. But the newly liberated areas are often only empty for a few weeks before being reoccupied nearby. This proves that enforcement does not address the root causes at all. It only shifts the problem from one neighborhood to another, creating endless cycles of instability. The city can temporarily improve its image by clearing visible areas, but such actions do not improve the safety, health, or future of those affected. Stability cannot be created by pushing people away, and order cannot be maintained by making them disappear from sight. The situation becomes even more dangerous as summer approaches, with temperatures frequently exceeding 110 or the rainy season, with the risk of sudden floods overflowing washes and low-lying areas. Having no stable shelter in this weather is not just inconvenient, it's a real risk to life. When laws, created to protect life, become tools of further insecurity, homelessness is no longer just a housing crisis. It became a human rights crisis. And that's the key point. Enforcement only creates surface-level order, while people at the grassroots level continue to be pushed deeper into instability, without being offered any real solutions. In Las Vegas, homelessness isn't just happening on the ground. It takes place in the dark spaces that tourists never see. If RV homelessness is the upper level of an underground metropolis, then even deeper, beneath hundreds of miles of storm drains, another world exists, where people have lived in persistent darkness for decades. Tunnel life isn't an urban legend. It's a quiet reality of Las Vegas, where thousands seek shelter underground, avoiding the sun, wind, and even the eyes of the world above. Those tunnels were never meant to be homes. There was no light, no clean water, and no minimum sanitation. Just one unusual rainstorm or flash flood from the mountains, and the entire community below could be swept away in a matter of minutes. But when RVs are towed, break down, or are kicked out of parking areas, which is happening more frequently in 2024, many people have no choice but to return to the tunnel. It wasn't a choice. It was a surrender to a chain of constraints that forced them to live between two extremes, either in the easily lost RV or in the cold, dark earth. That challenge becomes even more severe as Nevada's desert climate gets hotter. Las Vegas is seeing a sharp increase in the number of days exceeding 100-degree Fahrenheit each year, and forecast models indicate that days with temperatures of 110-degree Fahrenheit or higher will continue to rise. That temperature turned the RV into a scorching metal box without air conditioning, and made the tunnel stuffy, humid, and difficult to breathe in. Their dwelling place was not only temporary, but also hostile to life in the quietest and most brutal way. The parallel existence of two underground cities, one on wheels, one beneath the ground, exposes the deep stratification of Las Vegas. Above ground, the city shines brightly, services are luxurious, and hotels are worth billions. But just a few meters down, or a turn away from an affluent neighborhood, and you're immediately in the world of those pushed out of the place the city was built to serve. There's a Las Vegas of light, and there's a Las Vegas of shadow. And those two realities rarely intersect. The noteworthy point is that RV and tunnel life are not two separate stories, but rather two branches of the same current. Lack of housing, strict enforcement, cost of living exceeding income, and wages not keeping pace with housing prices. The back and forth movement between RVs and tunnels reveals an alarming level of instability. No one is truly stable in any form of shelter, as each place has its own risks, and every small mistake can become a disaster. And when a city exists in two parallel worlds, one for tourists, one for those trying to survive, it's the clearest sign that the housing system is dysfunctional. It is no longer a foundation for human life, but has become a sieve, pushing the most vulnerable down into the underlevels that the city never intended for them. If there's one place where urban policy most clearly reveals the tension between image and reality, it's Las Vegas. To protect the tourism brand, which is the city's economic pillar, the authorities have prioritized enforcement for many years, clearing camps, banning camping, fining people sleeping outdoors, towing RVs, and even arresting those who did not relocate in time. All of this is implemented with the goal of keeping the streets clean. But it overlooks the most important question. Where will the people being removed go? The data shows that the shelter system is indeed expanding, but the rate of expansion is not keeping pace with the scale of the crisis. The unsheltered still make up the majority of the total 7,906 homeless individuals. And even if there are empty beds, not everyone is suitable. Night shift workers, pet owners, those who need minimal privacy, those with trauma, are all unlikely to find stable shelter in a traditional shelter. In reality, the punish clean tow strategy only creates constant displacement. From one vacant lot to another, from commercial areas to the suburbs, and then back to the original location when enforcement temporarily cools down. None of them had the opportunity to settle down, and that instability made them even more susceptible to falling into despair, illness, or violence. Enforcement doesn't quell the crisis, it just pushes it elsewhere. Meanwhile, investments in affordable housing and social services remain too small to make a real difference. Building a few thousand units of affordable housing sounds positive, but it's nothing compared to the city's shortage of 78,000 homes. Programs for mental support, medical care, or career counseling are still piecemeal, lacking the depth to support those on the brink. Enforcement, by its nature, only addresses the visible part of the problem: flattened tent camps, towed RVs, and temporarily clean empty lots for a few weeks. But it doesn't get to the core. Rent is rising, workers' wages are stagnant, the cost of living is skyrocketing, while support mechanisms can't keep pace with the decline of marginalized lives. The result is a vicious cycle. The number of homeless people increases, enforcement increases accordingly, the homeless are pushed to other areas, and then they reappear when they can't go any further. The following year, the data increased again, and everything repeated like a pre-programmed cycle. Every European and American city that followed this model came to the same conclusion. The more they punished, the higher the social costs. And the result was that the number of homeless people continued to increase, until policy shifts from enforcement to sustainable support, from sweeping it under the rug to bringing it into the system. Las Vegas will only continue to clean up the surface, while the rotten structure beneath silently spreads, like a crack in a building that no one dares to look down into the basement to see how far it's cracked. Figures up over 20% in just 1 year and over 36% in 2 years are no longer simply local statistics for Las Vegas. They are becoming the common heartbeat of many cities across the United States, especially those that rely on tourism, services, extreme weather, and low wages. There, what was once considered a Vegas anomaly is now beginning to emerge as a recurring pattern. As housing becomes unaffordable, as rental markets rise while real incomes fall, People are starting to turn RVs, trailers, or old cars into their primary homes. RV homelessness is not, by nature, a chosen lifestyle. It's a form of parasitic living solution, a temporary housing system that arises when the formal housing system cannot accommodate the low-income population. When the housing market becomes detached from workers' earning capacity, people are forced to find ways to survive on the margins. RVs have become a symbol not of freedom, but of helplessness in the face of increasingly oppressive living costs. This isn't just happening in Vegas. It reflects widespread economic pressure across the country. The homeless in Las Vegas are not a particularly poorer group, but rather people living in a city that is several years ahead of others in the trajectory of crisis. Without a nationwide package of solutions, from building affordable housing and providing rental assistance to reforming zoning to pave the way for new supply, the rows of RVs parked in 110 degrees of heat in Vegas today could be a common sight in many other cities tomorrow. Las Vegas, in this context, is no longer an isolated incident. It's a warning model. A resource-rich city, famous for tourism and entertainment, yet a large portion of its residents are forced to make do with old, cramped, easily damaged and easily lost vehicles. When a city like this has slipped into a housing crisis so deep that RVs have become a mainstream solution, it's clear that the right to have a roof over one's head is becoming a kind of privilege, no longer the normal foundation of American life. And that is the most worrying message. No city is large enough to ignore the housing crisis. The RV crisis is not a marginal image, but the earliest and clearest signal of a system that is out of balance. It's a harbinger that the current housing model, which relies on the free market and expectations of continuous price increases, is reaching its limits. When looking at Las Vegas today, we don't see the end of a problem, but rather the beginning of a nationwide housing crisis. A reminder that if action isn't taken now, those weathered RVs by the side of the desert could become a familiar sight from coast to coast. And then, the US will pay a much higher price than investing in a solution now. Perhaps Las Vegas has never been a perfect reflection of America. But at this moment, that city is reflecting on the cracks that many other cities also carry within them. From weathered RVs parked along the desert to dark tunnels where people seek refuge from the 110 degrees sun, they all tell the same story. When the housing system fails to fulfill its basic function, the fragility of life is most evident in the brightest places. There is no simple solution to a complex crisis like this. But it can't be said that this is just a Las Vegas issue, because what happens here today is very likely to appear in many other cities tomorrow. The question is no longer, why do they live in RVs? But rather, what has driven thousands of people to have only RVs to live in? And even deeper, what does a society need to keep people safe and housed? Perhaps when these questions are answered, we will truly understand that the right to housing is not a privilege, but a minimum condition for a stable society to function. If just 2 paychecks can push someone into homelessness, is the problem with them, or with a system that has left them so vulnerable? And if a resource-rich city like Las Vegas can't keep its residents in safe homes, what will happen to less fortunate places? If this story reminds you of what's happening where you live, or opens up a new perspective on what we often overlook every day, please leave a comment below. If you find the video helpful, you can press like, share it with others to watch, and subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. Each interaction you make not only supports the channel, but also helps important topics like this reach a wider audience. This video is not intended to condemn any individual, group of people, or organization. All the facts, figures, and analysis in the video are compiled from public sources, local reports, and independent research. Some statements are presented from a sociological perspective and may be estimates or conjectures based on available data. The purpose of the video is to increase community understanding, not to promote division, and not to encourage illegal behavior in any form.